Hey guys, it's Brian from Fantasy Labs. Thanks for watching. This is the weekly video where I break down the Thursday ownership percentages from the FanDuel Thursday night contest and then try to give you my thoughts on how I think they will apply to Sunday contests and all that. So again, thanks for watching and thanks to DFSreport.com who supplies all this information. They entered the $2 NFL Snap, which is about 115,000 entries. So again, it's a good contest because we get to see a bunch of people and their thoughts, and obviously the more entries, the more predictive it's going to be because it's not a small sample size. So this is the first box is obviously just the ones from last night. DeAndre Hopkins was highly owned because I'm not sure if he was going to be limited at all. They said they were going to increase his workload, but we didn't know what that meant. Plus, Vontae Davis was out for the Colts, their star cornerback, so he was a must play, especially at the volume that he was getting, and that was reflected as well. So let's go through the guys who are playing on Sunday and Monday. So starting out with quarterback, we have Brady, who is just massively owned over everyone else, which kind of makes sense. Brady's coming off a bye, and they're playing against a Cowboys team that is struggling right now. They're playing Brandon Weeden, and everyone just knows that Bill Belichick, when he gets 2 weeks to prepare for an opponent, that it usually is not so great for the other opponent. So I assume that Brady will be probably the highest owned quarterback on DK as well on Sunday, and he's kind of the no-brainer cash option. I'm sure there will be lots in Edelman, also Brady and Gronk stacks in GPPs. He's probably a little high. I don't think he's necessarily too high for GPPs, just because I think there's a couple ways you can go. I think you could stack him with Edelman or Gronk. Obviously, Gronk is the higher upside stack because of the touchdowns, especially in a million maker when you need multiple touchdowns. But I think a Brady Dion Lewis stack is actually kind of interesting. Dion Lewis is a guy who can catch the balls out of the backfield. He's had a bunch of receiving yards in the games he's played, and has a lot of upside as well. So I think that a lot of people are going to be stacking him with Edelman or Gronk. So I kind of like the idea of stacking Brady and Lewis together. Usually you don't want the can get you some variant ownership benefit. So that's kind of an interesting strategy that I don't mind employing. Matt Ryan's obviously going to be highly owned, as I think he should be. They're going against a Redskins team who is actually pretty good pass or run defense rather. So I think they're going to have to rely on their passing game a lot. So I think that we're probably in for a big game for Ryan and Julio. He's going to have a bounce back week, I would expect. But I think he's a pretty safe option as well. Tyrod has been the guy who everyone just kind of used just because his salary hasn't increased that much. But I think that his upside's limited, and especially with Carlos Williams out, Sammy Watkins is out, and they're just not really sure who their running back's going to be and what help he's going to have. They were talking about Boopy Dixon was going to get some time, but he's apparently questionable and not sure how much he's going to go. So I don't know. I think I'm probably fading the Bills, or at least most of the Bills. Maybe some Clay, but I'm not sure about that. Let's see. I don't hate Mariota in this situation. I think that people might have forgotten about him, and he's coming off a bye, so I think he's interesting. Breeze is the guy that's that I'm really unsure about, just because he had that great week last week in terms of fantasy points. I didn't think he was that great in real life. He had that drive to win the game, but he's still not throwing the ball downfield, and usually want big plays. And so I think he'll have yards and he'll have receptions and stuff like that. I'm just not sure if he has the upside needed, and he just doesn't look like Breeze. So I thought maybe his ownership would be up this week enough where I him because and feel comfortable about it. But at this ownership, maybe I play him more than I thought I was going to. Um, Wilson's always interesting. He's going against the Bengals, and Marshawn Lynch is officially out. So he's definitely not safe play by any means. He's definitely a risky play. We saw what the Seattle offense did without Marshawn last week, and beat up, especially their O-line got beat up by that Detroit defense, which hasn't looked good all year, and they looked amazing last week. So I think that says a lot about Seattle, more so than Detroit. So this could be a rough game for Wilson. So I think I'm on the Bengals D, but Russell Wilson's a guy who can move around a lot, so he's always kind of a GPP play. Running back, whew. All right, so obviously we need to talk about Devonta Freeman. 49 at 40.9%. I don't see any way that I would play him. Like there's no reason for me to play him. I think I'm going to do a full fade. It just doesn't make sense because if you think about it, so the factors working against him. So obviously the high ownership here. So even if you enter him in a Millie Maker and he's this high owned, if he's 40% owned, even if he goes off like he did in previous weeks where he went off for a bunch of yards and 3 touchdowns, you're still going to have to be almost half the field. So it doesn't really put you at an advantage. It actually is more beneficial for you at that him, in my opinion. So not only is it high ownership and ridiculously high ownership, number 2, I don't think that there's a ton of up. As we said, that matchup against the Redskins is pretty tough, actually. The Redskins have the best opponent plus minus against running backs in the last year, which means that they've allowed fewer fantasy points than we would expect based on a running back salary. So they've been kind of the best fantasy run defense that we've seen. So matchup, and Tevin Coleman is coming back, and I know Tevin Coleman is probably going to be eased in, and he's not going to get a ton of carries. But even if you think that Tevin Coleman's only going to get, say, let's be conservative and say 5 to 7 carries or touches, that makes a big difference, especially in a Millie Maker, like where the margin for error is so small. Like 5 to 7 touches is huge when you're trying to project a guy to go off and score you 30 fantasy points. So kind of all those factors and the fact that I think that, as Tank brought up, this is semi-revenge game. I'm not a huge narrative street guy, but semi-revenge game for Kyle Shanahan, who's the offensive coordinator for the Falcons and, used to be with the Redskins and all of that. So I think Tank said he thinks that Ryan and Julio are going to go off and run up the score, and the running backs won't do that much. But I don't know how I feel about that, but I do know that I am fading Freeman because that is ridiculously too high. So full fade. Le'Veon and Charles, I think, are the 2 easiest cash options. I like Charles a little bit better. I think just overall, period, outside of the ownership. I just think that he has a little bit better matchup, and he's just such a huge part of their offense, and they're projected to score quite a bit of fantasy points this week by Vegas. So they're in a really good matchup, and Charles is in a really good spot. And so I think he's probably my favorite overall running back this week. Bell's number 2, and I was a little bit torn, so I was excited to see the ownership percentages because I was probably going to just really, really base my lineups based on this, just because I think that even though Charles is not like significant by any means. So, but the fact that the better play, 13, I think I'm going to go a lot more Charles than Bell, but I'll still mix Bell in. I think that he has a lot of upside and safety. So these are definitely my 2 cash game plays. Forsett I love this week just because, there's just no players for the Ravens to step up without Crockett Gilmore. Definitely no Steve Smith. These minimum salary guys like Kamar Aiken, Marlon Brown, and everyone is trying to guess which one is going to be owned, and perhaps it's Kamar Aiken. We'll get to the wide receivers in just a second. But we were talking on the podcast last night, me, Bales, and Tank, and I think we were all in agreement that we think that Steve Smith and Crockett Gilmore being out is more of a bump for Forsett than any of those min price receivers. That if Flacco's going to kind of play it conservative and they're just going to to try to win the game in the best way and put it in their best players' hands. We think that is going to be a bump for Forsett. He's very reasonably priced, especially on DraftKings. So I think that he's very safe and has upside. So I'll probably exposure to him. Dion Lewis, I'll have a ton of exposure to him too. I'll probably pair Charles and Lewis on DraftKings. On FanDuel, I probably would go maybe Bell. Charles is the most expensive, and he's pretty darn expensive on FanDuel. He's not great at value, so I might go a little less than them. Maybe that has something to do with the ownership percentage. Maybe Charles will be a little more on DraftKings, but I'll probably have one of these two in my cash, and then I'll pair him with Lewis just because he has so much upside. He's going to get carries. I know that people are worried about LeGarrette and that's fine, but I just think that the Patriots know what they have in the talented guy like Lewis, and they're just going to give him the ball and put him in space, both with rushes and passing. So I think that he's going to get a bunch of work, especially in a game where they're going against the Cowboys, and I think that they're going to just destroy the Cowboys this week. Like Lewis, I think he has a lot of safety and a lot of upside, and he's still pretty cheap. Gurley is kind of the enigma for me. I tweeted earlier that a player have no clue what to do about, and I kind of flip-flop every 10 seconds, and Gurley's that guy for me. And I'll take you counts about him real quick. So, he exploded last week and looked great. The dude's a stud. I own him in dynasty leagues and season long. I think he's going to be a player. I think he's great. The problem is that the dogs, and it's just really important for running back. So, my concern is that we aren't exactly sure what's going to happen to him if they. Obviously, in GPPs, you're not so worried about that because upside anyway. There's a chance that the Rams don't get down actually, and maybe they slow down the pace and Gurley becomes a great play. So I definitely don't mind GPPs, but in cash, it does worry me. TJ Hernandez on Twitter actually came up with a stat, and Davis Maddock was talking about it and wrote it in his column about Gurley and the fact that Fisher relies on his RB1 kind of no matter the game script. So I think they're talking me into him being a little bit more safe than I initially thought. So I'm currently more in GPPs than cash. I'm not sure about cash just because of Lewis and at a similar price point. I think more safety. I'm flip-flopping. I'm on him right now, but we'll see. But I definitely think that's probably fair ownership. And Forte is interesting. Alshon Jeffrey is probably not going to play. So I think that he's always a guy who has safety and upside in really any matchup. So I think he's interesting, especially at that low ownership point. So I definitely don't mind that. Duke Johnson is a guy that people thought he's in snap percentage has increased so much over the first 4 weeks. He was up to like 61% as far as snap percentage. So he was just getting a lot more attention. So that'll be interesting. No Latavius for me this week. Carlos, I think, is going to be out. So it sucks for people who rostered him. But that's what happens when you get stuck on those FanDuel and can't swap out. So Edelman, no surprise, is going to be the highest owned guy just because Brady, and especially in cash, I think that makes sense. He's a guy, especially point PPR. He's just going to get a ton of receptions, and he just has more. He needs receptions. He's going to get 75 yards, and if he gets a touchdown, great. If he doesn't, you're still getting 15 fantasy points, and you kind of at his price point, which is always around 7K. He's not going to kill you, and he has the upside of a little bit more. So he is always one of the safest receivers for me. I typically stay away from him, and I don't think he has the upside that some guys do. But in cash, I definitely don't mind Julian Edelman really any week. Fitz is obviously a guy who kind of is turned into one of the safer receivers this year as well. And he's just going to continue to be one of the higher owned guys. That's fine. And a couple other guys in GPPs that have a little more upside this week, but especially at that 22%, a ton of Fitz, but I wouldn't blame you for for having him. Maclin's really high for me. I just, if you just think about how you think that game's going to go, the Kansas City game, I just think that it's going to be a lot of Jamal Charles. And, if they get into a spot where they need to get in the red zone and throw it into the red zone, I think Kelce is going to be the target, not Maclin. I know Maclin's been solid this year, especially for a Kansas City running back, or wide receiver rather. But at 20.9%, especially when I'm so much on Charles, I just don't think I really care to have a lot of Maclin. Julio coming down to 16.3, and I love that. I'm going to have so much Julio. I think he should be up here, and he probably would have been if it wasn't for the down week last week. But people overreact, and they taken a lot of Devontae, obviously, and I will gladly fade Devontae and play all. That's probably exactly what I'm going to do. I love Keenan this week as well. I think that he's going to be a great play. I think he's gotten a little unlucky. I came out with a metric called Taser, which I encourage you to go to Fantasy Labs and check out my kind of introduction and explanation to it. But it's just basically which receivers have gotten lucky/unlucky, their targets and everything, what we'd expect them to score touchdowns. It's been targeted like crazy, yet hasn't gotten to the end zone as much as there's situations that happens. Remember that year that had all those receptions and just but kept on being tackled at the 1 yard line. It's just stuff like that happens. There's a lot of luck that comes into the game, and Keenan Allen's been one of those guys where he's just a target monster, yet hasn't got to the end zone maybe as much as we would expect based on those numbers. So I think he is very safe and has a high upside, because one of these weeks he's going to get into the end zone. I think people may be a little worried that Antonio Gates is back and going to steal some receptions, but I'm not too worried about that. And I'm all over Keenan Allen. Odell is a stud anytime you can get him, or really any of these top receivers, in single-digit ownership. I think that makes sense. Allen Hurns is a very, very, very recency bias play. I love Allen Robinson. Allen Hurns has one game a year where he's good. If you like game, it was like 4, 6, 6, and then last week it was like 13. So it was just kind of a random at 9.2. Even if it was 5 or 3, I still wouldn't want any part of it. So, but especially at close to 10, no, thank you. Emmanuel Sanders is one of my favorite wide receivers, because apparently Demaryius is possibly limited. That news came out today where he is kind of questionable with a sore neck, and they're going against the Oakland Raiders, who just have notorious field. We saw this last week with Martellus Bennett, who was just open every play right down the middle of the field. So typically this means that we want to target tight ends against Oakland, and I think that Owen Daniels might be a popular choice as a result of that. But I actually think that the guy who's going to be in the slot and the guy who's going to be in the middle of the field won't be Owen Daniels, and it'll actually be Emmanuel Sanders. So I think that Emmanuel Sanders will kind of play the role of this. I think you're getting at this ownership salary I love. So he's definitely one of my favorite plays, and he becomes a must play if Demaryius is out. But even if he's in, he's still one of my in a ton of my GPP lineups. Going down, Kamar Aiken. Yes, this is what I wanted to see. It's kind of these min-priced receivers that people were going to be on, and this is about where I would expect. I thought Kamar Aiken might be a little more, maybe 6 or 7%, but this is fair. I think maybe it might be up a little bit more just because of the salary floor is different on FanDuel as opposed to DraftKings, which is important when you think about it. The top wide receivers on FanDuel and DraftKings are both going to be about 9,000, but the difference is the minimum is going to be 3,000, whereas the min guys on it doesn't to take a low price min receiver on FanDuel as much as it does on DraftKings, just because savings. So I think that Kamar Aiken and Willie Snead will probably be a little bit higher on DraftKings, and I think that they're fine plays. But I am worried that this ownership is going to bump up more than I like. Cobb, I am interested in. That's really low for him. He's usually up there. I think this could be an Eddie Lacy game, so maybe people are also concerned about that, but that's interesting. Antonio Brown is kind of in the same boat. Maybe people think this is just a Le'Veon Bell, but I think I'm going to have a lot of Antonio Brown just because I think people think that, okay, Vic is his quarterback, and they're going to give Le'Veon the bell at the time. But really, all these guys, like if you AJ Green, Mike Evans, these are elite wide matchup to offer 2 or 3 touchdowns in any game in 150 yards. And if you can get them at under 5% owned, like, do it. So that's a big thing I look for. So, I mean, even sort of out of their situation to match that for me to not take them at under 5%. So guys, Cobb, Brown, AJ, even Amari, I'm fine. Probably off him a little bit more because he's not necessarily in that same class. Evans, I think, is in that same class. Or Coop, if I can get those guys, especially Brown, Green, and Cobb, if they're going to be under 5% on DraftKings, then I would like a lot of them. On to tight ends. Gronk is obviously going to be the top guy. No surprise. Patriots are just heavy favorites, and he's the dude. Antonio, I am probably going to fade him this week just because I'm not sure what his role is going to be. He's coming in off the suspension. It's not like he was injured, so there's no worry about like ramping up. But I think that they've been semi-happy with Ladarius Green, and they've had a good rapport with Keenan Allen and Stevie Johnson and those guys. So I think that there might be a transition as far as how to get Antonio Gates involved in the offense. I know he's been there forever, and that may seem silly, but I think that there is an element of risk when I'm not really sure about it. Clay is fine. I'm not huge on the Bills' offense, but he's pretty safe. Daniels, yeah. So I thought that he would be a big bump. You would never see him above 2%. And people are just really on this against Raiders defense. I think it's fine. He's really cheap. I mean, I think he's only $2,700, $2,800 on DraftKings, so I'm fine with it. Again, I think that Sanders is going to get the bulk of those, but I don't mind Daniel just in case that is not the case. Kelsey, is really dependent on. I don't hate him in the same sort of. I think it's going to be a Charles in a GPP lineup or two, just in case. A couple last interesting guys to me. Larry Donnell is really interesting to me. He has got a lot of pro trends on our sites, high in our models. Obviously, he's very touchdown dependent, so he's not a cat in a GPP at less 1% owned. Could be a good spot. Eifert is interesting to me as well. He's going against the Seahawks. And the Seahawks aren't great against tight ends. They're really good on the outside, but they are not great down the middle. And I think Eifert could be an interesting play. And at his low ownership, I definitely do not mind that either. I probably wouldn't play him in cash. I'll probably try to get Gronk in there if I can. Especially if Alshon's out. But yeah. In last Giants, Atlanta, same. Just kind of good defenses so far, and guys that are. I think this is going to be my play of the week at a fair price. They're at 33. Really fair for me, and at less than 10% owned. I think that if you prepare for Brandon Weeden, then you are looking at a ton of turnover, an awful day for the Cowboys. So that's what I'm banking on. I think that they have a lot of safety because I don't think that they're going to give up a lot of points. I think they cover a lot. So they're going to be the defense that I focus on the most. Plays that are quite as good, but there's always some safe plays. Denver, I think, is really safe, and maybe that's why they were up there as well, just because of the safety. So I don't mind Denver as well, but New England, I'm probably going to roll with them in cash and JPP. So yeah, so that's it. Thanks for watching. And good luck in week 5. I will do a video tomorrow talking about the line movements from the opening lines of Vegas and where they've moved so far. So keep on the lookout for that. Obviously tomorrow being Saturday. So thanks for watching and good luck in week 5, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.